I got kissed by a billionaire in front of 300 people, and by morning, the entire internet thought I was engaged to him. I wish I were exaggerating. I wish this was one of those stories where the headline sounds worse than the reality, where everything gets cleared up with a quick statement and a polite apology. It wasn't. It was worse. It was cameras flashing like lightning, champagne glasses freezing midair, and Nathaniel Cross. Yes, that Nathaniel Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises, the man whose net worth could probably buy half of Manhattan, looking straight at me like I was the only person in a room full of diamonds and million-dollar smiles. And then he kissed me. Not a quick peck, not some awkward cheek brush you could laugh off later, but a real kiss, firm and deliberate, like it meant something. Like I meant something. My brain didn't catch up until 3 seconds after it happened. 3 full seconds of my life where I just stood there, frozen, my press badge still hanging crooked around my neck, my cheap blazer suddenly feeling 10 times too tight. When I finally pulled back, my first thought wasn't romantic. It was, what just happened? My second thought was, oh no, because the room had gone silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that feels loud, like it's pressing against your ears. And then the whisper started. Low at first, like wind slipping through cracks, then louder, sharper, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Is that his boyfriend? Since when does Nathaniel Cross date anyone? Why didn't we know about this? I didn't belong there. That was the truth of it. I was just a junior reporter sent to cover a charity gala, standing in a room where people wore watches that cost more than my rent for a year. I wasn't supposed to be part of the story. I was supposed to write about it. But somehow, in less than 10 seconds, I became the headline. Nathaniel didn't even look shaken. That was the most insane part. While I was internally combusting, he just stood there, calm, composed, one hand still resting lightly at my waist like this was completely normal, like we had done this 100 times before. His thumb brushed slightly against the fabric of my blazer, a small movement, barely noticeable, but it sent a strange, electric awareness through me that I absolutely refused to acknowledge. Smile, he murmured under his breath, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. Smile? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he had lost his mind, if he had mistaken me for someone else, if there was some hidden camera waiting to reveal this was all a joke. But instead, because my survival instincts apparently defaulted to chaos, I smiled. Stiff, confused, probably bordering on unhinged, but a smile nonetheless. The cameras loved it. Of course they did. Flashes exploded around us, capturing every angle, every second, freezing that moment into something permanent, something undeniable. By the time I stumbled out of the ballroom 10 minutes later, my phone was already vibrating nonstop in my pocket. Notifications, messages, calls, my editor, my friends, numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't even have to open anything to know. The damage was done. Somewhere out there, headlines were already being written. Somewhere out there, people were already deciding who I was. And the worst part? I hadn't even figured that out myself yet. But one thing was very, very clear. Nathaniel Cross hadn't kissed me by accident. And whatever game he had just pulled me into, I was already in too deep to walk away. I made it exactly 12 steps down the marble staircase before someone grabbed my wrist. Not hard, not aggressive, just firm enough to stop me like I had run into an invisible wall. I turned, already bracing myself for another reporter, another question, another flash of curiosity I could not answer. But it was him. Of course it was him. Nathaniel Cross stood there like he had not just detonated my entire life in under 10 seconds. His expression calm, unreadable, like the chaos swirling around us had nothing to do with him. You are leaving early, he said, his voice smooth, controlled, as if we were discussing something as casual as the weather. I stared at him. You think? I snapped, my voice coming out sharper than I intended, but I did not care. My heart was still racing, my thoughts tripping over each other, trying to catch up to a reality that made absolutely no sense. He did not react to my tone, not even a flicker. His grip shifted slightly, not tighter, just enough to guide me, and before I could protest, he was already steering me toward a side exit like this was part of some plan I had not agreed to. What are you doing? I demanded, trying to pull my hand free. Damage control, he replied simply. Damage control. The words echoed in my head, cold and precise. Like I was not a person, just a problem he needed to fix. The night air hit me the moment we stepped outside, cool and sharp against my overheated skin, but it did nothing to clear my head. A sleek black car was already waiting at the curb, engine running, the driver stepping out the second he saw Nathaniel. Of course there was a car. Of course everything was already arranged. Because this was not chaos to him. This was strategy. "Get in," Nathaniel said. I blinked at him. Absolutely not. His gaze dropped to mine, steady, unshaken. "If you walk away right now, the narrative writes itself without you." That stopped me. I hated that it did. I hated that my brain immediately filled in the blanks. Random journalist. Public kiss. No explanation. The internet would tear it apart within hours. Within minutes. He saw the hesitation. Of course he did. "If you come with me," he continued, his tone softer now, but still controlled. "You get to decide what happens next." Decide. The word felt like a lie, but it was still more than I had standing alone on that sidewalk with my phone buzzing like a ticking bomb in my pocket. I exhaled sharply, already knowing I was about to make a terrible decision. 5 minutes, I said. You explain what the hell that was, and then I am done. Something shifted in his expression then. Not a smile, not quite, but a subtle easing, like he had expected this outcome all along. 5 minutes, he agreed. The car door opened with a soft click, and before I could second-guess myself, I slid inside. The interior smelled expensive, leather and something clean and understated. The door shut behind me with a quiet finality that made my chest tighten. Nathaniel followed, settling into the seat beside me with effortless composure, like this was just another routine part of his night. The car pulled away from the curb almost immediately, the city lights blurring past the window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until I could not take it anymore. You kissed me, I said flatly. In front of hundreds of people. Yes, he replied. Just yes. Like that explained anything. I turned toward him fully, frustration bubbling over. Why? That was when he finally looked at me. Really looked, his gaze sharp, focused, like he was measuring something I could not see. Because, he said quietly, you were the only option I had. And somehow, that answer made everything feel even more complicated. The only option. I let the words sit there for a second, turning them over in my head like they might magically start making sense if I looked at them from a different angle. They did not. I was standing next to a flower arrangement, I said slowly. How exactly was I your only option? Nathaniel did not look away. He did not fidget or hesitate or give me anything that resembled doubt. Because you were not part of it, he said. Part of what? The setup. I frowned. What setup? He exhaled, not impatiently, but like he was choosing his next words with surgical precision. The man I was speaking to tonight, he began, has been trying to damage my reputation for months. Business tactics, media leaks, carefully placed rumors. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination. My stomach dropped slightly. The argument, I said, that was not just a disagreement. No, Nathaniel confirmed. It was meant to escalate. Publicly, I replayed the moment in my head, the tension, the sharp edges in their voices, the way people had started to notice. So you kissed me, I said, still trying to connect the dots. To stop a business scandal? To redirect it, he corrected calmly. Of course he did. Of course his solution to a potential reputation crisis was to create an entirely different, much louder one. I stared at him, incredulous. You could have picked anyone. I could not, he said. Everyone in that room was connected to someone. Investors, partners, media, competitors. Anyone else would have created a narrative I could not control. His gaze sharpened slightly. You were the only variable. Variable. That was what I was to him. Not a person. Not a stranger he had just pulled into something life-altering. A variable. That is not comforting, I muttered. It is not meant to be, he replied. The honesty caught me off guard. There was no apology in his tone, no attempt to soften what he had done. Just a straightforward acknowledgement that this had been calculated. Intentional. I leaned back against the seat, crossing my arms as I tried to process the sheer audacity of it all. So let me get this straight, I said. You created a public relationship with someone you do not know, without their consent, to manage your image. Temporarily, he added. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Oh well, that makes it so much better. The car slowed slightly as it turned onto a quieter street, the city noise fading into something softer, more distant. The shift in pace made everything feel more real somehow, more contained. Like there was no easy escape from this conversation. The narrative is already moving, Nathaniel continued, his voice steady. By now, there are articles, speculation, analysis. If we do nothing, it becomes chaos. And if we do something? I asked. He held my gaze. Then it becomes a story we control. There it was again. Control. Everything about him revolved around it. Control of the situation, the narrative, the outcome. I should have been angry. I was angry. But underneath that, there was something else creeping in. Curiosity. Because despite everything, despite the fact that he had completely upended my life without warning, there was a strange logic to what he was saying. A terrifying, effective kind of logic. And where do I fit into this controlled story? I asked quietly. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. His eyes flicked over my face briefly, like he was assessing something, calculating again. Then he said, "That depends on whether you are willing to cooperate." A warning bell went off in my head. Loud. Clear. Define cooperate, I said. He leaned back slightly, the movement subtle but deliberate, as if he was preparing to present something that would change everything. You stay, he said. You play your role. And in return, you gain something most people spend years chasing. I narrowed my eyes. Which is? His lips curved just barely, not quite a smile, but something close. Opportunity. And for the first time since this entire mess started, I had the distinct feeling that I was standing at the edge of something I did not fully understand yet, something that could either fix everything or make it infinitely more complicated. Opportunity. The word lingered in the air between us, polished and tempting, like something you would see engraved on a plaque in a corner office overlooking the entire city. I stared at him, trying to decide if I should laugh or open the car door and roll onto the pavement at 30 miles per hour. You kissed me without asking, I said flatly. And now you are offering me opportunity. Nathaniel did not flinch. I am offering you a way to benefit from a situation that is already unfolding, he corrected. I pressed my lips together, because that was annoyingly precise. And what exactly does this role involve? I asked, because I feel like that part is very important. He inclined his head slightly, like he appreciated the question. We confirm the relationship, he said. Publicly. We maintain it for a fixed period of time. Appear together when necessary. Support the narrative. I blinked. Support the narrative, I repeated. You mean pretend? Yes, he said simply. The honesty was disarming. Again, I shifted in my seat, the leather cool beneath my hands as I tried to wrap my head around what he was suggesting. And how long is this performance supposed to last? 6 weeks, he replied. 6 weeks. That was not a small favor. That was not something you did casually and then forgot about. That was 6 weeks of being watched, analyzed, photographed, turned into something I was not sure I recognized. And after that, I asked. We separate, he said. Amicably. The narrative concludes. My reputation stabilizes. You return to your life. My life. The phrase felt distant, like something I had already stepped away from the moment he pulled me into that kiss. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temple as the weight of it all settled in. You are asking me to fake being engaged to you, I said, just to hear it out loud. Yes. To a man I met less than an hour ago. Yes. Because you needed to redirect a scandal. Correct. I dropped my hand and looked at him again, really looked this time. At the sharp lines of his face, the calm in his posture, the absolute certainty in the way he spoke. He was not guessing. He was not hoping this would work. He knew it would. That was the terrifying part. And what do I get out of this? I asked quietly, besides 6 weeks of my life turned upside down. There was a brief pause, the kind that felt intentional, measured. Then Nathaniel said, access. My brows drew together. Access to what? To me, he said. To my company. To resources that most journalists would not be allowed near. My heart skipped, just slightly. He noticed. Of course he did. An exclusive, he added. On your terms. When this is over. That hit harder than I expected. Because that was not just opportunity. That was career-changing. The kind of thing people waited years for. The kind of thing that could open every door I had been knocking on since I started. I hated that it tempted me. I hated that my brain was already calculating what that could mean. And if I say no? I asked, forcing the question out before I could lose my nerve. Nathaniel held my gaze, steady as ever. Then you walk away, he said. And you face whatever version of this story the world decides to tell without you. Silence filled the car again, thick and pressing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, relentless, a reminder that the world outside was already moving, already shaping something I had no control over. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. This was insane, completely insane. And yet, I was already in it, whether I liked it or not. I let out a quiet breath, staring at the blurred city lights through the window before finally speaking. If I do this, I said slowly, there are rules. For the first time since this began, something in Nathaniel's expression shifted, a flicker of interest, sharp and immediate. Of course, he said. I turned back to him, my pulse steadying just enough for me to meet his gaze head-on. Then you are going to listen very carefully, I said. Because if I was about to agree to something this reckless, I was not going to do it on his terms alone. The car came to a smooth stop in front of a building that looked like it had never known anything less than perfection, all glass and steel and quiet power, the kind of place that made you feel underdressed just by standing near it. I barely noticed. My focus stayed locked on Nathaniel as I held his gaze, forcing myself not to look away first. Rule number 1, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You do not touch me without warning again. His eyes flickered slightly, not surprise exactly, more like acknowledgement. Noted, he said. Rule number 2. I continued, leaning forward just a fraction, no surprises. No pulling me into anything without telling me first. I am not a prop you get to move around whenever it is convenient. A brief pause. Then, agreed. Too easy. That should have made me feel better. It did not. Rule number 3. I said, my pulse picking up just a little. This stays controlled. Public appearances, sure. Statements, fine. But outside of that, you do not get to blur the lines whenever you feel like it. That one landed differently. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened just slightly, the smallest shift in his posture, like something about that condition mattered more than the others. Define blur the lines, he said quietly. I held his gaze. You know exactly what I mean. A bead of silence stretched between us, charged in a way I did not want to examine too closely. Then he gave a small nod. Understood. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax. And last rule, I added, because if I was doing this, I needed something that belonged entirely to me. I decide what I say to the press about my side of this. You do not script me. That one took longer. Nathaniel studied me, really studied me, like he was reassessing the variables in a calculation he thought he had already solved. Within reason, he said finally. I shook my head. No, not within reason. If I am putting my name on this, I am not going to sound like a rehearsed press release. Another pause, longer this time. Then, slowly, fine. The words settled between us like a contract being signed without paper. My chest tightened, because that was it. That was the moment where this stopped being hypothetical. I had just negotiated terms for something I should have walked away from entirely. Good, I said, even though nothing about this felt good. Nathaniel reached for the door handle, then paused, his hand hovering for just a second before he looked back at me. There is one more thing, he said. I frowned slightly. What? We need to make it believable, he said. I let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. You already kissed me in front of 300 people. I think they believe it. That was the introduction, he replied calmly. This is the maintenance. The words sent a strange, unsettled feeling through me. Maintenance. Like whatever this was, it was going to require effort. Consistency. Time. People will watch how we interact, he continued. The details. The small things. That is where stories either hold or fall apart. My mind immediately jumped to every accidental touch, every glance, every moment that could be misread or overanalyzed. Or worse, felt too real. I crossed my arms, more out of instinct than comfort. So what are you saying? I asked. Nathaniel's gaze softened just a fraction, enough that it caught me off guard. I am saying, he said, his voice lower now, more measured, that if we do this, we do not just act like two people pretending. We act like two people who have already chosen each other. The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere I was not prepared for. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. This was supposed to be simple. A deal. A transaction. 6 weeks and done. But the way he said that, it did not feel simple at all. And the worst part? A small, traitorous part of me wondered what that would actually look like. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Chosen each other. The phrase echoed in my head, soft but heavy, like it carried more weight than it was supposed to. This was not real. None of this was real. It was a deal. A controlled narrative. 6 weeks. That was it. And yet the way he said it made it sound like something else entirely. I looked away first, breaking the eye contact because holding it felt like stepping too close to something I did not understand. You are asking for a lot of detail for something fake, I said, my voice quieter now, less sharp, more cautious. Nathaniel opened the car door, stepping out with the same effortless composure he had carried all night. The difference between fake and believable is detail, he replied, glancing back at me. I followed a second later, the cool night air brushing against my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The building loomed above us, all sharp lines and quiet authority, the kind of place that did not need to announce itself because everyone already knew what it was. Come on, he said, already moving toward the entrance. I hesitated for half a second. Then I followed. Of course I did. The lobby was exactly what I expected. Polished floors, soft lighting, a front desk staffed by someone who looked like they had never once been surprised by anything in their life. But the moment Nathaniel stepped inside, something shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, just the tension. Subtle, immediate, like the room adjusted itself around him without anyone saying a word. And just like that, I understood something new. This was his world. Not the gala, not the headlines. This, the quiet, controlled space where everything moved according to his rhythm. Which meant if I was going to survive 6 weeks in it, I needed to learn fast. Nathaniel, the receptionist, greeted smoothly, her voice warm but professional. Her eyes flicked to me, just briefly, but there was curiosity there. Recognition. It had already started. He nodded once in acknowledgement, his hand brushing lightly against the small of my back as he guided me toward the elevators. The contact was brief, controlled, and yet it sent a sharp awareness through me that I could not ignore. I stopped walking. He noticed immediately. Of course he did. His hand dropped away without hesitation, his gaze shifting to mine. Too much, he asked quietly. I shook my head once, more to clear it than anything else. You said no surprises, I reminded him. Something in his expression softened again, just a fraction. Right, he said. Warning. Then, more deliberately this time, he stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the shift in space between us. May I, he asked. It was such a small thing. 2 words. But it changed everything. I held his gaze for a second, searching for something I could not quite name. Then I gave a short nod. Fine. His hand returned to my back, lighter this time, slower, like he was giving me time to adjust instead of taking control. It should not have mattered. But it did. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and we stepped inside together. The doors closed behind us, sealing off the outside world in a quiet, enclosed space that suddenly felt much smaller than it actually was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the elevator filled the silence, steady and low. Then Nathaniel reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone and turning the screen toward me. It has started, he said. I looked down. Headlines. Photos. The two of us, frozen in that moment under flashing lights. Speculation already twisting into certainty. Engagement rumors. Relationship timelines that did not exist. People analyzing expressions, body language, meaning where there had been none. Or at least, none that I had been aware of. My stomach tightened. This is insane, I murmured. Yes, he agreed calmly. I glanced up at him. And you are still sure this is the best way to handle it? His eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. It is the only way to control it. Control. Always control. I looked back at the screen, at the version of myself already being created by strangers. Then I exhaled slowly, the reality finally settling in. There was no stepping back now. No clean exit. Just forward. Then I guess, I said quietly, handing the phone back to him, we should start acting like it. The elevator stopped with a soft chime, but my heart did not. It kept going, fast and uneven, like it had not gotten the memo that this was supposed to be controlled, calculated, manageable. The doors slid open to a floor that looked less like an office and more like a private world, quiet and expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows stretching across the entire wall, the city glowing beneath us in a grid of lights and motion. For a second, I just stood there, taking it in. This was not where people like me ended up. Not by accident. You will get used to it, Nathaniel said, stepping out ahead of me like he had done this 1,000 times. I followed, slower, my eyes still adjusting to the scale of everything. "I'm not sure I want to," I muttered. He glanced back, just briefly. "You will," he repeated, not unkindly, but with that same quiet certainty that seemed to define everything he said. His office was at the end of the hall, a wide space with clean lines and minimal clutter, everything intentional, everything in its place. It felt like him. Controlled. Precise. I hovered near the entrance for a second before stepping fully inside, suddenly aware of how out of place I probably looked. My slightly wrinkled blazer, my scuffed shoes, the press badge still clipped awkwardly at my waist. Nathaniel did not seem to notice. Or if he did not care. He moved behind his desk, setting his phone down before turning back to me. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. I did not move right away. "You really just bring strangers up here?" I asked. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You are not a stranger anymore." The words landed differently than they should have. I ignored that. Instead, I walked over and sat, crossing my arms as I tried to regain some sense of control over a situation that kept slipping further out of my hands. "So what now?" I asked. "Now," he said, picking up a tablet from his desk and tapping it once. "We define the relationship." I blinked. "We what?" He turned the screen toward me. "A document. Clean. Structured. Bullet points. My name. His name. Dates. Public appearances. Key talking points." I stared at it, my brain lagging half a second behind my eyes. "You made a plan," I said slowly. "Of course," he replied. "Of course." I leaned forward despite myself, scanning the document. "First public confirmation within 12 hours, I read aloud. "Joint appearance within 48 hours. Coordinated statements." I trailed off, looking up at him. "You really do not do anything halfway, do you?" "No," he said simply. I huffed out a breath, leaning back again. "This is insane." "Yes," he agreed. Again with that calm acceptance, like insanity was just another variable to manage. I dragged a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. "Okay," I said finally. "If we are doing this, we need a story." His gaze sharpened slightly. "We have one." "No," I cut in. "You have one. I need to know it." A beat of silence passed, then he nodded once. "We met 3 months ago," he began. "At a private event. We kept it discreet due to professional considerations." I narrowed my eyes. "That is vague." "It is meant to be," he said. "Specific details create points of failure." I frowned, but I could not argue with that logic. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he continued, "the relationship has progressed to the point where discretion is no longer practical." I let out a small, incredulous laugh. "That is one way to put it." He watched me for a second, then added, "We emphasize mutual respect. Stability. Intent." I blinked. "Intent. Long-term potential," he clarified. That word hit differently. Long-term. Even though we both knew this was temporary. Even though it was all part of the narrative. It still felt heavy. "You really expect people to believe that?" I asked quietly. Nathaniel held my gaze, steady as ever. "I expect them to believe what we show them," he said. And there it was again. Not hope. Not guesswork. Control. I looked back down at the document, at the version of us that already existed on paper, clean and convincing and completely fabricated. Then I exhaled slowly, the last bit of hesitation slipping away. "Okay," I said. "Then we do it right." His eyes flickered just slightly. "We do it right," he echoed. And somehow, sitting there across from him, with the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass and a future I had not planned unfolding in front of me, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. This was supposed to be an act, but if we were not careful, it was going to start feeling real. The first thing Nathaniel did the next morning was hand me a schedule. Not a suggestion, not a rough outline. A schedule, down to the minute. I stared at it like it might rearrange itself into something less intimidating if I blinked enough times. "You wake up at 5? I asked, squinting at the line that clearly said 5:30 a.m. workout. He did not even look up from his coffee. "Yes." I checked the rest of it. Meetings, calls, briefings, a lunch that was labeled strategic, which somehow sounded more stressful than relaxing. And right there, at 10 a.m., bold and impossible to ignore, joint statement release. My stomach tightened. "That is in 2 hours," I said. "Correct." I looked up at him. I have not even had breakfast. He slid a plate toward me without missing a beat. Eggs, toast, fruit, perfectly arranged, like everything else in his life. I blinked. You planned that too? Yes. Of course he did. I sat down anyway, because apparently I had already committed to this level of chaos, and picked up the fork. My hands were steady. That felt like a win. So, I said, taking a bite just to buy myself a second, what exactly are we saying in this statement? Nathaniel set his cup down, finally giving me his full attention. We confirm the relationship, he said. We emphasize privacy. We express appreciation for the support. I chewed slowly, processing. That sounds very clean, I said. It is meant to be, he replied. I swallowed. And what about how we met? We keep it vague, he said. Consistent with the narrative we discussed. Right. 3 months. Private event. Discreet. I nodded once, more to myself than anything else. And what if someone asks something we did not plan for? I asked. His gaze held mine. Then we do not answer it. Simple. Direct. Controlled. I exhaled through my nose, setting the fork down. You make this sound easy. It is not easy, he said. It is structured. That was somehow worse. Because structure meant expectation. It meant performance. It meant there was a right way and a wrong way to do this, and I was already very aware of how easy it would be to get it wrong. My phone buzzed on the table, and this time I picked it up. Notifications flooded the screen. Messages from my editor, my friends, numbers I still did not recognize. Headlines stacked on top of each other, each one more confident than the last. They were not asking if it was true anymore. They were deciding how true it was. I let out a quiet breath, locking the screen and setting the phone back down. Okay, I said. We confirm it. Nathaniel watched me carefully. You are sure? I met his gaze, my pulse steadying with each second. No, I admitted. But I am already in it. So we might as well do it right. Something shifted in his expression again, subtle but real. Approval. Not overwhelming. Not obvious. Just there. Good, he said. He stood then, reaching for his jacket and slipping it on with practiced ease. We have 30 minutes before the photographer arrives. I blinked. The what? The photographer, he repeated. For the official images. Of course there was a photographer. Of course there were official images. Because this was not just a statement. This was a launch. I pushed my chair back, standing a little too quickly. You are kidding. I am not, he said calmly. I ran a hand through my hair, already feeling the edge of panic creeping in. I am not ready for that. Nathaniel stepped closer, not too close, just enough that his presence felt steady instead of overwhelming. You do not need to be ready, he said. You need to be convincing. I let out a short, breathless laugh. That is somehow worse. Jamie, he said, and the way he said my name, low and certain, made me look at him before I could stop myself. Look at me. I did. Of course I did. We do this together, he said. You are not alone in it. The words settled somewhere deeper than I expected. Not alone. I swallowed, my shoulders relaxing just slightly. Right, I said quietly. Together. And for the first time since this entire thing started, the idea did not feel quite as impossible as it had a few hours ago. The photographer arrived exactly on time, which somehow made everything feel even more real. Not 5 minutes late, not casually early, but precisely on schedule like every other part of Nathaniel's world. I stood in the middle of his office, trying very hard not to overthink the fact that I was about to participate in something that would probably end up on every major business and lifestyle site within the next hour. Relax your shoulders, a voice said. I blinked, realizing the photographer was already setting up, moving with quick, efficient motions that made it clear this was not their first time dealing with high-profile situations. I am relaxed, I said automatically. Nathaniel, standing beside me, glanced down just slightly. You are not, he said under his breath. I exhaled, forcing my shoulders to drop. I am working on it, I muttered. The photographer gave a small, encouraging smile. You two look great already. Just stand a little closer. Closer. Right. I shifted half an inch, then stopped, suddenly very aware of the space between me and Nathaniel. Or rather, the lack of it. He closed the distance without hesitation, smooth and natural, like this was something we had practiced. His hand settled lightly at my waist, not tight, not possessive, just present, controlled. My breath caught for a fraction of a second before I forced it back to normal. This was part of the act. Just part of the act. Perfect, the photographer said. Now look at each other. That was worse. I turned my head, meeting Nathaniel's gaze, and immediately understood why this was dangerous. Because he did not look uncertain. He did not look like he was pretending. His expression was steady, focused, with just enough softness to make it believable. Convincing. My brain scrambled to keep up. Think of something real, the photographer prompted. Something real. I almost laughed. There was nothing real about this. And yet, standing there, with his hand warm against my side and his eyes holding mine like he was not about to step away in 6 weeks, something in my chest shifted in a way I did not like. Good, the photographer said again. Hold that. The camera clicked. Once. Twice. Again. Each flash freezing the moment into something permanent, something that would be dissected and analyzed and turned into a story that was not entirely ours. Now something a little more candid, the photographer added. Maybe a smile, something softer. I hesitated. Nathaniel did not. His thumb moved slightly, a small, almost imperceptible motion against my side, grounding and distracting all at once. Jamie, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear, breathe. I let out a slow breath, the tension easing just enough for a real reaction to slip through. Not a perfect smile, not rehearsed, just something genuine, brief, and unguarded. The camera caught it immediately. That is it, the photographer said. That is the one. Another series of clicks followed, faster now, capturing angles and moments I was not even aware I was giving. By the time it was over, my heart was beating faster than it should have been for something that was supposed to be controlled. Structured. Safe. You did well, Nathaniel said once the photographer stepped away to review the shots. I glanced at him, still trying to steady myself. I survived, I corrected. That faint almost smile appeared again. That too. I huffed out a breath, running a hand through my hair. This is going to be everywhere, is it not? Yes, he said. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. Just the truth. I nodded slowly, looking out toward the city through the glass, trying to prepare myself for what came next. The headlines. The comments. The way people would start to fill in the gaps of a story they thought they understood. Then I said quietly, more to myself than to him. We better make sure they believe it. And standing there, with the images already captured and the narrative already moving, I realized something that made my chest tighten again. It was not just about making them believe it anymore. It was about making sure I did not start believing it too. The statement went live at exactly 10 o'clock, just like everything else in Nathaniel's world, precise and unavoidable. I did not even need to check my phone to know. I felt it. The shift. The way the air in the room seemed to tighten, like something invisible had just snapped into place. It is done, Nathaniel said, glancing at his screen. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly against my palm before I forced them to relax. That was fast. Speed prevents distortion, he replied. Of course it did. I reached for my phone anyway, because pretending I could ignore it was pointless. The second the screen lit up, it was chaos. Notifications stacked on top of each other so quickly I could barely read them. News alerts. Social media tags. Messages from people I had not spoken to in years suddenly acting like they had front row seats to my life. I opened the first headline I saw. It was already polished, already confident, already certain. A photo from 10 minutes ago sat at the top. One of the shots we had just taken, perfectly framed, perfectly timed, like it had always existed. I stared at it. At us. At the way it looked so natural, it almost felt like a lie I had told myself instead of the world. You see? Nathaniel said quietly. I glanced up at him. See what? They believe it, he replied. I looked back down at the screen, at the comments already pouring in, at the way people were dissecting every detail, every glance, every expression. Some of them were supportive. Some were skeptical. Some were already building entire narratives around a relationship that had technically existed for less than 24 hours. That is not belief, I said softly. That is assumption. Assumption becomes belief when it is reinforced, he said. I exhaled slowly, locking my phone again, because looking at it too long felt like losing control of something I did not even fully understand. And we reinforce it how? I asked. Nathaniel stepped closer, not invading my space, just entering it enough to remind me he was there. Steady and certain in a way I was still trying to catch up to. We appear, he said. We respond. We remain consistent. Consistent. That word again. It sounded simple when he said it. It did not feel simple at all. There is a press lunch this afternoon, he added. I blinked. Already? Yes. I let out a short breath, somewhere between a laugh and disbelief. Of course there is. He watched me carefully, like he was measuring my reaction, waiting to see if I would push back. I did not. Not this time. Because part of me already understood. This was not going to slow down. Not for me. Not for anyone. What do I need to know? I asked instead. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. Approval. Stay close, he said. Answer simply. Do not over-explain. I nodded once. And if I panic? That almost smile appeared again, brief but real. Then you look at me, he said, and let me handle it. I should have argued. I should have said I could handle myself, that I did not need someone else controlling the situation for me. But the truth was, standing there with my phone still buzzing in my hand, and my entire life being rewritten in real time, the idea of not having to do this alone was reassuring. Okay, I said quietly. Nathaniel reached out then, his hand brushing lightly against my wrist, not enough to startle, just enough to ground. We leave in 20 minutes, he said. I nodded again, my pulse steadying just slightly under the contact. Right. As he stepped back, the space between us returned, but something about it felt different now. Less like distance. More like something we were both aware of. I glanced at my phone one last time, at the headlines, the photos, the version of me that already existed out there. Then I slipped it into my pocket and took a slow breath. This was happening. Not later. Not eventually. Now. And whether I was ready or not, I was about to step fully into it. The press lunch was not what I expected. It was quieter, more controlled, which somehow made it worse. Because instead of chaos, instead of shouting questions and flashing cameras, it was a room full of very observant people pretending to be polite while analyzing every move we made. I could feel it the moment we walked in. Conversations dipped. I shifted. Attention snapped into place like a switch had been flipped. Stay with me, Nathaniel murmured, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. I did not need the reminder. My entire awareness was already anchored to him, to the steady presence at my side, to the way his hand rested lightly at my back as he guided me forward. Not controlling, not pushing, just there, consistent. We moved through the room together, stopping briefly to greet a few people I recognized from articles and bylines. Names I had only ever typed into search bars now suddenly attached to faces studying me with quiet curiosity. Jamie, Nathaniel said smoothly at one point, his tone shifting just enough to signal introduction. This is Caroline Hayes, senior editor at the Ledger. My brain scrambled to keep up. It is nice to meet you, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. Caroline's smile was polite, but her eyes were sharp. Likewise, she said. You have certainly made an entrance. I almost laughed at that, but caught myself just in time. It was not exactly planned, I replied carefully. Her gaze flicked briefly between me and Nathaniel, something calculating passing through her expression before she nodded. Interesting, she said, and just like that I knew. Every word mattered. Every reaction. Every pause. This was not a conversation. It was an evaluation. Nathaniel's hand shifted slightly at my back, a subtle pressure that grounded me without drawing attention. We are keeping things private, he said calmly, stepping in before the moment stretched too far. Caroline's smile did not falter. Of course you are. But the way she said it made it clear she did not expect that to last. We moved on, table by table, conversation by conversation. Each one felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between too much and not enough, between natural and calculated. You are doing well, Nathaniel murmured at one point as we paused near the edge of the room. I let out a quiet breath. I feel like I am being interviewed without knowing the questions. You are, he said simply. I glanced at him. That is not comforting. It is accurate, he replied. I huffed softly, shaking my head before straightening again as another group approached. This time, the questions came faster. Less polite. How long have you two been together? Why keep it private until now? Was last night spontaneous or planned? I felt the moment tighten, the air shifting as attention focused in. This was it. The part where I either held the line or broke it. I turned slightly toward Nathaniel, just enough to catch his eye. He did not speak. He did not step in. He just looked at me, steady and calm, like he trusted me to handle it. And for some reason, that mattered more than anything he could have said. We have known each other for a while. I answered, my voice even measured. We just chose to keep things to ourselves until now. It was not a lie. Not entirely. Just adjusted. Controlled. The questions continued, but the edge had softened, the narrative settling into place with each consistent answer. I could feel it happening, the shift from curiosity to acceptance, from speculation to something that looked a lot like belief. And through all of it, Nathaniel stayed beside me, steady and unwavering, his presence a constant point of reference in a room that wanted to pull me in 100 different directions. By the time we finally stepped back, the tension in my shoulders had eased just slightly, replaced by something else. Not confidence. Not yet. But something close. You handled that, Nathaniel said quietly. I glanced at him, a small, almost surprised smile pulling at my lips. I did not crash and burn. I corrected. That faint almost smile returned. That too. I exhaled, the adrenaline still lingering under my skin as I looked back at the room, at the people who were already moving on to their next conversation, their next story. But I knew something they did not. This was only the beginning, and the way things were going. I was not sure where the line between acting and reality was anymore. The moment we stepped out of the press room, the noise dropped off like someone had turned the volume knob down on the world, but my head did not follow. It was still buzzing, replaying every answer, every glance, every moment where I thought I might have slipped and somehow did not. I exhaled as we walked down the hallway, my steps slowing just slightly once we were out of immediate view. That felt like a test I did not. Study 4, I muttered. Nathaniel did not stop walking, but his pace adjusted just enough to match mine. You adapted, he said. That is more useful than preparation. I huffed quietly. I am going to put that on a motivational poster. He almost smiled. Almost. We reached the elevator, and for the first time since we entered the building, there was no one else around. No eyes. No quiet evaluations. Just the two of us and the soft hum of the building settling back into itself. The door slid open, and we stepped inside. The moment they closed, the tension shifted. Not gone. Just different. Less performative. More real. I leaned back against the wall, letting my head tilt slightly as I stared at the ceiling for a second. Tell me honestly, I said, my voice quieter now, stripped of the careful control I had been holding onto for the past hour. Did I mess anything up? There was a brief pause. Then Nathaniel said, no. I glanced at him, searching his expression for any hint of polite reassurance, anything that suggested he was just saying what I wanted to hear. I did not find it. You were consistent, he added. You did not overcompensate. You did not contradict the narrative. I blinked. That sounds like a performance review. It is, he said. I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. Of course it is. The elevator continued its descent, the numbers ticking down steadily, grounding in a way I had not expected. You were also, he started, then paused, like he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. I waited, curiosity catching me off guard. Also what? I asked. His gaze shifted to mine, steady but slightly less guarded than before. Natural, he finished. That word landed somewhere unexpected. Natural, I repeated, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. That is ironic, considering none of this is. It is not entirely false, he said. I frowned slightly. Which part? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, the way we present it, he said. That was not an answer. Not really. But something about the way he said it made it feel like there was more underneath, something he was not quite ready to explain. The elevator slowed, then stopped, the doors sliding open to the lobby. The world came rushing back in, quieter than before. But still full of movement, still full of people who would recognize us now, who would see us not as two individuals, but as something joined together by a story they believed was real. Nathaniel stepped out first, and I followed, falling into step beside him without thinking about it. That was new. The front desk receptionist glanced up, her polite smile just a little sharper this time, a little more knowing. I felt it again, that shift, that awareness that we were being seen differently now, evaluated differently, together. As we moved toward the exit, Nathaniel's hand brushed lightly against mine. Not intentional, not staged, just a brief contact as our steps aligned. I froze for half a second, the sensation sharper than it should have been. He noticed. Of course he did. His gaze flicked down, then back up to my face. Too much, he asked quietly. I hesitated. Because this time, it had not been planned. Not part of the act. Just natural. And that was somehow more dangerous than anything we had done so far. No, I said finally, my voice softer than I intended. His expression shifted slightly, something unreadable passing through his eyes before he nodded once. We stepped outside, the city stretching out in front of us, loud and alive, and completely unaware of how much had changed in less than 24 hours. I took a slow breath, the cool air steadying me just enough to think clearly again. This was still temporary, still controlled, still a deal. But as I stood there beside him, matching his pace without thinking, responding without hesitation, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore anymore. It was getting harder to tell where the performance ended and where something real might be starting. By the time we reached the car, the world had already moved on without us, or at least it looked like it had. People walked past without stopping, traffic flowed like nothing extraordinary had happened, and for a brief, almost fragile moment, it felt like I could step out of the narrative and disappear back into something normal. I knew better. Nathaniel opened the car door for me without a word, his movements as precise as ever, but there was something quieter about him now, something less calculated and more present. I slid into the seat, the familiar scent of leather grounding me again as the door closed with a soft, final click. He joined me a second later, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was not heavy this time. It was thoughtful. I stared out the window as the car pulled away, watching the city blur past in streaks of light and motion, my mind finally catching up to everything that had happened. Less than a day. That was all it had taken to turn my life into something I barely recognized. You can still walk away, Nathaniel said suddenly. I blinked, turning to look at him. His gaze was forward, not on me, his posture relaxed but deliberate, like he had been considering those words for a while before saying them. That was not part of the plan, I said quietly. It is still an option, he replied. I studied him, trying to understand what had shifted. Why are you telling me that now? I asked. A small pause. Then, because you should have the choice, he said. Choice. The word felt different coming from him this time. Less like a negotiation, more like something real. I let out a slow breath, leaning back against the seat as I considered it. Walking away, leaving the headlines, the story, the controlled narrative behind. Going back to my apartment, my job, my normal life. It should have been an easy decision. It was not. Because somewhere between the chaos and the structure, between the performance and the moments that felt just a little too genuine, something had shifted. Not everything. Not enough to change the deal. But enough to make the idea of leaving feel incomplete. If I walk away, I said slowly, this turns into something else. Yes, he said. And if I stay? I asked. This time, he looked at me. Really looked, like he was not measuring or calculating, just seeing. Then we continue, he said. Simple, honest. And somehow, that felt more complicated than anything else he had said so far. I held his gaze for a second, my thoughts settling into something clearer, steadier. This was never going to be simple. Not for 6 weeks. Not for either of us. But I had already stepped into it. Already started something I could not pretend was just a mistake anymore. We continue, I repeated softly. Something in his expression eased, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. The car turned, slowing slightly as it merged into traffic, the rhythm of the city pulling us forward whether we were ready or not. Then we do it properly, he said. I nodded once. We do it properly. The words felt different this time. Less like a performance. More like a decision. I looked out the window again, watching the city stretch endlessly ahead, and for the first time since this all began, I was not just reacting. I was choosing. And maybe that was the most dangerous part of all. Because if this was just an act, it had rules. An ending. A way out. But if it started to become something else, something real, I was not sure either of us knew how to stop it. And as the car carried us forward into whatever came next, one thought settled quietly, but firmly in the back of my mind. This was supposed to be temporary. So why did it already feel like something I was not going to walk away from?